I am not a dramatic man. Not for me the grand gesture, the flourish that captures the eye and the memory. When I graduated from the University of Florida, I had business, tending to the estate of my father, who had died suddenly, so I skipped the graduation walk and screams as the students hurled our student paraphernalia into the sunlit sky and had my diploma mailed to me. When I asked Mary, now my wife, to become my bride, I didn't hire a blimp to float across the sky with letters saying, "Marry me, Mary," or a plane carrying a banner proclaiming, "Make me a happy man, Mary." I didn't drop to one knee in a crowded restaurant and open a box containing a 2-carat diamond while diners around us sat and gawked. I didn't order oysters Rockefeller and let her open one containing the said 2-carat diamond ring. No, I rolled over next to her naked, luscious body in the bed we shared in my off-campus apartment after bringing her to finish. She opened her light brown eyes to stare at me with a quizzical smile. "Are you going for some kind of new record, Hugh? Not that I would object, but you wore me out that last time." I just stared at her for a moment. I'd had other women before her. My family had money, and when I was 15, I'd F an 18-year-old who had cleaned our house while my parents were gone. If you have a car, aren't too bad looking, know how to talk to girls and have some experience, it's not hard to get in high school and college. However, Mary was different. She had been from the moment I'd set eyes on her taut body and pretty face, framed by the long, straight, brown hair and the fashion that every co-ed wore 3 decades ago in an economics class in 1970, when we were both seniors. She was going steady, a step away from being engaged to a Harvard man. He was wealthy, and with a Harvard degree behind him looked set to provide the kind of life any girl could look forward to. But then, he was at Harvard, and I was with Mary, at the University of Florida. I worked on her for half a year. I was nice, not pushy, and I was a gentleman, but she knew I wanted her. Not hearts and flowers and hand-holding, but I wanted those high-set chests. I invited her out for coffee and studied with her, and when boyfriend forgot to call or was busy, I was there to take her out for a pizza and to commiserate and hint that he was probably banging some wealthy northern cutie. We took long walks on the campus and talked books, and I persuaded her to go with me to see movies and plays, just as friends. I apologized for stealing our first kiss, and she told me she wouldn't go out with me for anything again. Class would be our only meeting place, but she did, and I kissed her again and again. She was guilty because she was still semi-engaged, but I had no conscience and I kept asking her out. We spent almost every night until graduation together. I looked at her lying next to me and remembered those days and nights, and I didn't even have to think about what I was saying. "I love you, Mary. I know I've said it before, but this is the real thing. I want to live with you and make babies and wake up with you and go to bed with you for the rest of my life. Let's get married." She looked at me, and then my heart sank as she got a serious look on her face and shook her head. "No. Wah. I don't know that I can, Hugh. I thought you loved me too. Was this all make-believe?" She reached out to touch my face and tears ran down hers. "Oh yes, baby, I love you. Probably too much. It scares me. If we get married and something happens, like you die or meet somebody else and fall in love with them, I couldn't survive it. I wouldn't. I love you so much you scare me. I will never leave you, not voluntarily. I will never love another woman, and I'll do any damn thing I can to make sure I outlive you. My family lives a long time, except for my father, and that accident was a fluke. I'll make very sure my brakes always work." That was how it began nearly 40 years ago. Now we are long married, parents of a 32-year-old neurosurgeon practicing in Los Angeles, and a 29-year-old editor with Random House in New York City, and grandparents to a 3-year-old boy named Austin and a 1-year-old girl named Calabria. Where the hell that came from, I'll never know. I work out and I've tried to watch my diet. I'm in pretty good shape for a 57-year-old man. I've got most of my hair, which is turning fashionably gray, and most of my teeth. I still have a few secretaries and female execs send out signals once in a while, and those kinds of smiles, that little touch on the arm that isn't required, jokes about what they're going to be doing while their boyfriend or husband is out of town on a business trip. It's flattering, but I never consider them seriously. I went through one patch, one fever spell, about 10 years ago when for some reason I daydreamed about every nubile female that came within a dozen feet of me. I flirted and made halfway serious dates, but I could never make myself go through with them to the ultimate infidelity, and one day, the fever just went away. Mary has become a beautiful and sensuous woman. She's 57, but she could pass easily for early 40s. At parties and get-togethers, I've grown used to younger men attempting to cut her out and away from me to put their brand on her. She gets a kick out of the fact, as she describes it to me afterwards, how these young men, some of them not even born when we F for the first time, rub the evidence of their excitement against her. It's a sign that PR has taken over the culture, she says, laughing as she lays against me in bed afterwards. They really think that all they have to do is rub up against me, and I'll be overcome with lust. Tell me, Hugh, when you were that age, did you really expect that all you had to do was rub it up against a woman to seduce her? You forget that when I was their age I already had a woman, and I didn't need to rub it up against her to get her. Just being in the same room did it. She'd poke me in the side, a hole. I was never that easy. So, she was hot as hell and I wasn't bad. We had a good life and I expected that we would glide gently into old age, together, loving and enjoying as much of a life as was physically possible. I worked for the Hunt Bank in Jacksonville, one of the biggest independent banks in the Southeast, as an upper-level executive. I'd worked for them for more than 25 years, back to the days when old man Hunt had still been around. He'd built it up into a financial powerhouse and groomed his beloved granddaughter Gail so that she took over the bank in 1990. Mary worked as a sales rep for McDaniel's Educational Enterprises, one of the nation's largest suppliers of educational testing materials. She was a senior rep and as a result did a lot of traveling. It wasn't unusual for her to be on the road 3 weekends out of the month. Sometimes they were 3 or 4-day trips when she headed north or out to the Midwest. There were months when she'd be away more than she was home. But she loved the job, and it took her places she'd never have been able to afford if we were paying for it ourselves. We were comfortable, not Hunt rich. She took tons of pictures and always had stories for me. And as often as we could, we went back and visited the places she told me about together. Quite honestly, her being away as much as she was made the time we were together seem like mini honeymoons. For a couple of, the thing was pretty hot and regular. We laughed as she told me about the nights when guys she'd met for lunch or supper would call her in her hotel and ask her, in low voices, "What are you wearing?" Sometimes they'd identify themselves, sometimes they'd make crank calls. She said at first it threw her. Her first reactions were anger, then nervousness, but nobody ever showed up to hammer on her hotel door, and, if they had, there was hotel security. Then, one night as we lay, she looked at me with what could only be described as embarrassment and said, "Hugh, I've been bad." I laughed and said, "You sure as hell have. I'm going to need a transfusion if you get any worse." She reached out and laid one small hand on the side of my face. "No, baby. I've been bad on this last trip." "What do you mean?" I wondered what it was. Bad, for her, could have been anything. I was curious, not worried. "Tell me and let me decide if I'm going to have to take a belt to you, or a tire iron to some guy." "No tire iron, but you might want to spank me." "I might like that." "Spill." "You know, guys call me up asking me what I'm wearing and flirting and stuff." "Yeah. I get so damn tired of it. These are middle-aged guys who can't get up the nerve to make a pass at me while we're together, and somehow they think that talking about what I wear is going to get me so hot, I'll invite them up to my room for some. Is that what they call it nowadays? So you want them to be man enough to make passes at you eye to eye?" She hit me on the chest with her fist. "You bastard, the only man I want making passes at me is you." But it is aggravating, and this night, in Chicago, a superintendent at some level in the city school system, I forgot exactly what his title was, called me up and asked me that question. Then he laughed and apologized and told me who he was and said I was so hot he had to ask the question. And, well, we got to talking. It was so refreshing to talk to a guy who was actually honest enough to talk to me instead of being a pervert on the phone. He's married, but... I know, she doesn't understand him. He said that, and then he laughed. He said she loves him and he loves her. But they've been married for nearly 20 years, out of college, and they've gotten stale. There's a lot of that going around, baby, at least from what I hear around the water cooler at work. So did he ask you to meet him? I expected she would say he had, and she had shot him down. Why should this guy be any different from the legions before him that had fought so hard to get into her panties, without ever getting a sniff of the promised land? No, he never did anything like that. He was a gentleman. who called a married woman to ask her what she was wearing in bed and talk about his stale marriage. She shook her head, and there was a flash, only a momentary flash, of something that I realized was irritation. For as long as it took the emotion to appear and disappear, it felt odd. She was irritated with me. We were always on the same side. No, Hugh. I know it was a stupid thing to do, but he didn't really act like a creep. We just talked and joked, and I was trying to figure out what she was trying to tell me. She had acted like she was joking, but she actually did seem a little embarrassed, and so far I had no idea what she might be embarrassed about. And, with the traveling I've done the last couple months, we've spent less time together than in a long time. I know. And I was a little horny. Make it a lot. And while we were talking, I got a little risque. Risque? Like, yeah, phones. You actually talked about him? No. We just talked about how we looked and what we liked. I told him about how we make love, and he talked about what he and his wife like to do. And you used your fingers. I didn't tell him what I was doing, baby. I swear to God I didn't. But you get pretty loud. He knew you were playing with yourself, didn't he? She stopped, and I looked deep into her eyes, and she lowered her eyes, then raised them to me. She was blushing. Yes, he knew, and he told me he knew what I was doing, and he was doing the same thing, and he described what he was doing. Did you hang up on him then? No. Did you help him out? Tell him what you'd be doing to his with your? She pulled herself up to look at me while she placed both hands on either side of my face to hold my gaze on her. No, Hugh, no. If you've ever believed anything I have said to you, believe me on this. I didn't play that game with him. I didn't say anything while he was talking. But you didn't hang up? No. She lowered her face to my chest. I felt so dirty afterwards. When he was through, I hung up. I know he called me back, but I didn't take any calls, and the next day I stayed away from him and wouldn't talk to him. Did he try to get it started again? Yes. I finally got him aside and told him we'd both been acting like high school kids, and that wasn't me. I didn't want to have to bring it to the attention of his superiors, and if he didn't forget about the whole thing, even if it cost us a contract, I would. She kissed my chest. Baby, I am so sorry. We've been married 30 years plus, and I have never done anything like that. If we live together another 30 years, I never will again. Please tell me you believe me. I thought about it for a minute. Just tell me one thing. Did you think about meeting him, about carrying it further? She was silent for a long time. I want so bad to lie to you, but I know you'd know it. Yes, for just a small period of time. I was thinking about it, not that I wanted to have it with him. You've always been more than enough, but I've only been with 4 men in my life and nobody except you in more than 30 years. I never thought about it seriously. I put my arms around her and hugged her tightly. Do you still love me? Yes. Have you been faithful to me? Oh, yes. Do you want to F again as soon as I can? Oh, God, yes. It shook me a little, I have to admit. It was the first time anything like that had ever happened on her side, but I remember the period of my sexual fever. Only luck and maybe someone upstairs looking out for me kept me from cheating on Mary and going so crazy that our entire marriage might have crashed and burned. It helped that I could read her, just as I knew she could read me. She had told me the truth. She had been tempted but had walked away. She was human, and I couldn't ask any more. Our life went on. She traveled from Jacksonville to Atlanta, Charlotte, New York, Hartford, San Francisco, Denver, and Portland, but not again to Chicago. Then it was 2007, and she was on a business trip to Indianapolis. It had been 9 months since the conversation about the Chicago phone experience. Sometimes it felt like something had changed, but there was nothing I could put my finger on. She was just as passionate most of the time. Yet there were times when she was cool, but we'd always gone through those mountain peak and valley cycles. Nobody can be smoking hot all the time. So other times it felt like nothing had changed. Then, one Monday, she came home from a 4-day to Indianapolis. I was supposed to be at work. She picked up her Audi TTS coupe from waiting at JIA, where she normally kept it between trips, and drove to our Mandarin 2-story home, where we'd lived for the last 7 years. She came in the front door carrying a pull-behind travel bag and stopped in the doorway. Hugh, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? I'm not feeling well. Something's upset my stomach. I talked to Gail, and she said to go on home and take it easy for the rest of the day. She left the travel bag and came to stand, then squat, beside me. She reached out to feel my forehead with her cool hands. You're not feverish. Have you been nauseous? Have you thrown up? Have you taken anything? No, a little, no. No. I don't understand, Hugh. You sound so funny and you're looking at me so strangely. I took her hand away from my cool forehead and held it between mine. I feel like I'm dreaming, Mary. Like I'm caught in a nightmare and I can't wake up. She was staring into my eyes and trying not to see. I knew that's what she was doing. We had been married too long. Makes sense, Hugh. You're scaring me. Why did you change your hotel from the Canterbury to the Wyndham West? She looked at me and her lips moved, but no words came out. She stared into my eyes as if the answer to some cosmic puzzle lay concealed there. You're asking me why I changed your hotel reservation from a hotel where the meeting you were attending was being held to one halfway across town. You'd have to get up an hour earlier in the morning to get to meetings. Nobody else from your company was staying there. The hotel management said it didn't come from your company. You personally asked for the change. The Wyndham was actually more expensive for that room, but you paid the difference yourself rather than having your company handle it. Why? How do you even know that, Hugh? I called and checked with the hotels. Then I talked to some people at your company. The change was all you. They said you've done it before, starting about 6 months ago, but you're so valuable that they don't question you. One of the human resource people said that you always get the job done, and you've always paid any differential from your personal account. It's one of the perks of being a key person, they said. Yes, I changed hotels, because I've been in the Wyndham before. I love the hotel, and it's far enough away from all the circus atmosphere of the meetings that I can relax in the evenings. It's worth spending a little of my own money. I earn a lot of money doing what I do, baby. You know that. But I still don't understand why you even bothered to check on where I was staying. Why in the world would you? And then her eyes widened. It felt for all the world like we were actors in a play, reciting our lines, looking ahead to the climax we knew was coming. At least, it felt that way to me. For the first time in nearly 40 years, I couldn't be sure about her. Hugh, you don't think, how could you? Where were you on the nights that I called your cell? At 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. and 12 midnight, and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. But you never. They weren't from any number you'd recognize. One of the hacker gurus at the bank did me a favor and gave me some hardware that allows your call to be bounced around the world, so it comes in from unknown numbers. You would have ignored them as crank calls. But where were you on nights when you had to be at an 8 a.m. meeting and you weren't answering your phone past 5 a.m.? Did you ever stop to think, Hugh, that the phone might have been turned off, that I might have had it in the other room and couldn't hear it, that I might have had a migraine, which you know I've gotten for 35 years, and put the phone under a pillow so I could go to sleep early so I could get up for one of those damned 8 a.m. meetings? Honestly, Mary, no, but I could see any of those things happening. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being out of touch, with transferring your hotels, with paying the extra from your own funds. You're well paid, and you could do that easily. I wouldn't tell you how to run your business any more than I'd expect you to be instructing me on how to run a bank. But what about the meetings in Des Moines, Madison, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Kansas City? What about the nights when I caught you just before you went to bed, and you said you were undressed and in bed, yet you were breathing so damned hard? Or the time in Madison when I could swear, that I heard a man laughing in the background as you answered your cell in your room at midnight. She stood and tears glistened in her eyes. You mentioned that, and I told you the television was on. That's what you heard, and I was running from the bathroom to catch the phone because I was afraid I'd miss your call, and I was afraid you'd wonder where I was. I was running because I was afraid, because I know you've been afraid of something happening ever since I told you about Chicago. I had to tell you, but I wish I hadn't now. You said it didn't bother you, that you could forget it, but you haven't. It's been sitting there in your head, festering and poisoning every look you've given me for 9 months. Every time you try to call me and you can't reach me, it's because I'm with him. When you hear the radio or a television show, it's him and they're making love to me. The only thing I don't understand, Hugh, is why you haven't had private detectives following me and taking pictures. Why haven't you put tiny tape recorders in my purse or my car or in my phone? So you can have proof that I'm a strange man behind your back. So you can divorce me, throw me out of your house, give the pictures of me around to our children to make them hate me too. You used to love me. You used to trust me. I used to know who you were. I don't anymore. She stood 5 feet away from me, looking at me as I sat in the easy chair, and it felt as if she were on another continent. I tried not to. I tried as hard as I could to keep my dignity, but I felt the tears come. When we lie in bed together, when your skin is against me, it's almost as if I can see him. It's as if there's a ghost in the room, in our bed, with us, between us. When you laugh, I can almost hear him saying something, and I think it's him you're laughing at, or with. In the bed, in the dark, when you should be asleep, your eyes are open and I know you're thinking of him. When you're gone, I try to think of what you're doing and imagine you doing what you've always done, meeting and selling and being my friendly wife who would never touch another man. But I can't see you anymore. It's as if there are shadows between us. I stood up slowly until I was facing her. Now the tears were flowing down my face. I haven't hired private detectives because how could I be hiring private detectives to watch my wife? To watch you, Mary? What kind of a world am I living in when I could even think about hiring detectives to watch you? About bugging your purse or your cell phone or tapping our home phone? That happens in cheap novels, not in our life. I keep telling myself, this can't be happening. Then, when I confront you, it's the television, or you racing to catch the phone, or a radio broadcast, and you're changing your hotel away from anyone who knows you and could spot you with another man, because you like the other hotels better. I don't know what the truth is, but I know, Mary, I know. I know you've requested trips to Madison and Kansas City and those other Midwest cities because they're close enough that a Chicago education exec could get to them for a few days, could spend them with you and inside you, and you thought I'd never know. I raised my hands to her, and even that seemed so melodramatic. It just wasn't me. How could you do that, Mary? How could you do that to a man that loves you? How could you betray me like that? Just tell me. Make me understand. She just stared at me, and now the tears were rolling down her face. Now we were both blubbering. I reached out to her, grabbing her hands and pulling her to me. I looked down at her and felt her flesh. Then I remembered what she felt and looked like on those nights so damned long ago. Just tell me, Mary. For God's sake, tell me. You can go on torturing me, driving me crazy, knowing but not knowing. I can't make you be honest. But if you ever loved me, if there's even a tiny bit of that love left, don't leave me hanging here. Tell me the truth. I don't want to hear it, but I need to hear it, and I can't hear it. Yet I do hear it, soft but clear and distinct. Yes, I've been meeting him, being with him, since 3 months after. You were right about everything. When you heard laughter, that was him. When you couldn't reach me, I was with him. All night, 3 and 4 times a night. I even missed a few morning meetings because I couldn't tear myself away from him. I think about him at night, lying next to you. It's him I'm thinking about. I let her go because her touch burned. It hurt to even look at her now. Why? It was just something I had to do. I fought at Hugh. I really did. Because I knew I'd lose you in our life. But in the end, I threw everything away to have him. Do you love him? This was the last handhold. This was the last thing holding me to even a tiny fragment of the life I loved. I don't know, Hugh. That said it all. Game, set, and match. The fat lady had sung. All hope gone. I could have said something dramatic. I could have cursed her faithless heart, placed a gypsy curse on her and her lover. But, like I said, I'm not a dramatic sort of guy. I'll find an apartment, Mary, and get a new phone, my own phone, where you can reach me. I'll forward the number. I guess you can tell the kids. I looked into her eyes. Get an attorney. We don't need to fight. We can divide our assets. We both make good money. The kids are grown. She still didn't say anything. Goodbye, Mary. Thank you for a lot of good years. I hope you're happy with him. Then I walked out on 36 years of my life. The next few days are a little fuzzy in my memory because I don't think I was ever sober for more than 30 minutes to an hour. Just long enough to walk from the dive I was renting to a liquor store on the corner. It was down on 8th Street in downtown Jacksonville. Pawn shops and video shops and hamburger joints and hookers in short shorts watching the cars go by and sometimes stop. I've never been really sure how I got there. I've lived in Jacksonville on and off for 30 years, and I've driven through the neighborhood often enough that I know what 8th Street is like. Guys that look and dress like me only show up to buy crack or pot or hookers. The cops would give me an odd look, and once or twice they asked me for ID, which I gave them. I was so drunk, I don't know why they didn't put me in the drunk tank. But these young men and women seem to be just embarrassed about confronting a sobbing man old enough to be their grandfather. Sometime, it could have been 5 years or 3 days. After I checked into the heart of the Southland Motel, someone was tapping me on the face and then trying to drown me. I coughed and wondered who the hell would be waterboarding a 57-year-old bank executive. Had I somehow run afoul of Homeland Security? Someone turned my head to the side and I first coughed and then vomited over the side of the scummy bed cover. God only knows what had dried on it. I really didn't want to think about it. I gasped and choked and thought I was going to die there. It felt like water had gone down into my lungs, and I couldn't breathe in oxygen too. Somehow I was on my feet with 2 sets of strong arms supporting me. I was hacking and coughing, still trying to draw oxygen into my lungs. For those few terrifying seconds, I just knew I'd never inhale another breath, and I was going to black out in this cheap suburb of hell. For the first time in a long time, I remembered my son and my daughter. Why the hell had I done this to myself? Why had I decided to commit it in this cheap motel room? Then I remembered why, and I wanted to forget again, or get drunk again, or just black out and never have to worry about anything again. But some hole kept pounding my back and telling me to breathe. I remember vomiting again, after which I found myself breathing once more. The next thing I knew, I was leaning back against cool leather, swaddled in clean-smelling towels that wrapped my naked arms and naked legs. Hell, I was stark naked. And I smelled a familiar scent. I managed to pry my eyelids open. As I thought, I was sitting in the back of Gail Hunt's stretch Rolls-Royce. She was sitting across from me, dressed as immaculately as ever, cool in green and blue blouse and skirt. Her cold blue eyes, so brilliant they seemed to gleam against the overhead lights, were focused on me. "Hi, boss. Fancy meeting you in hell." I could see Percy Cole sitting to one side of me. For a guy named Percy, he was the biggest hunk of manhood you'd find outside most NFL locker rooms. Despite his size, he was as gentle a man as I'd ever met. He was the vice president for personnel for the Hunt Bank chain. On the other side of me sat Bobby Beaufort, vice president for financial planning of the Hunt Banks, and the only man I'd ever seen put Percy down in the arm wrestling championships that were among the favorite spectator sports of the semi-annual team building weekends Old Man Hunt had instituted to build team morale 20 years before. Percy was whiter than typewriter paper and Bobby blacker than the inside of a coal bin. I had known both of them more than 20 years and had held Percy's head while he threw up into a wastebasket at his desk the day his longtime lover had told him they were through and he had found another man. I had pulled Bobby's black ass out of a Beach's biker bar the night he found his wife with his brother and had invaded the biker bar challenging any and all comers to trade punches. "Hi, guys." I paused, then continued on. "You should have left me where you found me. I'm dead. Just take me a little while to make it official." "Shut up, Hugh," Percy said, not unkindly. "And please try to stop throwing up on us," Bobby said. "Go back to sleep, Hugh," Gail said. I tried to remember why I had never even thought about her over the nearly 30 years I'd known her. She was a beautiful blonde worth, conservatively, $50 million. What was not to like? Then I remembered that she had been a little girl when I first met her, and that was always the way I'd looked at her. Also that her grandfather, Old Man Hunt, had been one of the finest men I'd ever known, and he had hired me and I'd built my life around his bank. When I woke up again, I was in clean sheets, didn't smell of vomit, I couldn't hear roaches rustling in the corners of the room, and my mouth didn't taste of blood and alcohol. I was wearing stiff, clean white pajamas. Memory came back with the clean smell and feel of the room, and I wondered how long I'd be able to stay out of hell this time. However, it wasn't fair to Peter and Nicole. They were married, had children, and I was one half of their parents. I had lost my father too early and my mother only a few years later. It was one of the few things in which life had not treated me kindly. How could I make them semi-orphans, just because their mother had turned out to be a W? But how could I go on breathing when it felt like one of the sand spurs, Those little round balls of sharp spikes that used to grow all over the yards of my childhood had somehow gotten lodged deep within my heart, and every breath made the spurs tear my flesh. There had to be a trick to it. If I could keep breathing long enough, I'd find it. The door opened and a vision in pink and white silk glided in and sat down on the bed beside me. I tried to understand how Gail Hunt could be here in what had to be sometime during the late morning, judging by the light coming in through the large French windows. Why wasn't she at the bank? "It's Saturday, Hugh," she said, reading my mind effortlessly. Saturday? Mary had flown in on a Monday, and this was Saturday? What had happened to the week? "You've been drinking yourself into a stupor for most of the week," she said, again reading my mind. "Why, Gail? Why all this?" I gestured to the room around me. I knew where I was. I was in the Hunt Estate's main house, a 20-room Shangri-La that had been started and mostly finished by her grandfather. I had been here during parties. I had been here when she was married. I had been here when she announced that she was leaving her husband, a high school teacher, because the marriage hadn't worked out. I watched her face as she beamed upon the tall, good-looking, evil son of A.B. who everybody knew she'd been around with for months before her idiot husband ever had the slightest idea of what was going on. I'd wondered then how any human being could be so stupid. Now I knew. I'd been there a year later when the evil son of A.B. made the mistake of backhanding her in front of his crew of thugs. Only before I could reach him, Percy had broken both his arms and threw him through a door. And Bobby had sent his 3 cronies through a large plate glass window, one at a time. They say love is blind, but it only took that one blow to dissolve her second marriage. And now she, like me, was enjoying the single life. Of course, she had a head start on me. "You didn't show up for work, Hugh. That was all it took. We couldn't find you. And when I finally tracked down Mary, she would only say that you had left your house and wouldn't be coming back. She had no idea where you were." She looked at me, and the pity was clear in her eyes. "She flew up to Chicago Tuesday, the day we learned later you'd started trying to drink yourself to death. We talked to her on her cell. She didn't say, but we found out she was in Chicago. She didn't waste any time. She was so closed-mouthed that I started checking around. You obviously knew about it. His name is Richard Kelly, 45 years old, assistant superintendent for purchasing of textbooks and academic supplies. Makes $110,000 a year because he has an uncle on the Chicago City Council, and his family has been deep into politics for 100 years. He was married, but 6 months ago he split from his wife, moved into a townhouse, and has been seen frequently with a lady that very closely resembles your Mary. Mary has been staying in his townhouse since she arrived there Tuesday night. She took a 2-week leave from McDaniel's. She reached out and put her hand on mine. I got pictures, video, and audio. It wasn't hard. If you need anything, for whatever legal action you want to take, just ask and it's yours." I reached up to wipe the moisture away from my eyes. "Why?" "Because you're a very valued member of the Hunt organization. You're a good man, and you're the closest thing to a real uncle I've got in this world. I loved Mary like an aunt, and I still can't believe what I saw and heard." I stared at the streams of sunlight refracting through the window. "Thank you, Gail, but I won't need any ammunition." "You're not going to divorce her?" "No, she'll divorce me, I guess. I don't plan on remarrying, and in any case, I've got more than enough money to be comfortable. We don't have anything we need to fight over. I imagine she will file. It looks like she's going to try to make a new life with this guy. I won't stand in her way." She stared at me. "You were married for 36 years, and you're not going to do anything? Just let her walk away?" "She's been seeing him for 6 months and hiding it from me. She's been talking to me and pretending to be my loving wife while he was naked in a bed with her. She was thinking about him when she was with him and thinking about him when she was with me. It's probably longer than 6 months, maybe back to that first time she met him 9 months ago. She hasn't been my wife in almost a year. She told me she's missed meetings because she couldn't bear to tear herself away from his F. He's 12 years younger than me, which translates to a more vigorous lover. She told me, in a roundabout way, that he can go 3 and 4 times. It's been decades since I could go 4 times in a 24-hour period. Really, she wants to be with him. The minute I walk out, she flies to him, and he left his wife, almost certainly to be with her. Who am I to stand in the path of true love? She grabbed my hand and squeezed. Hugh, I am so sorry. If there was any couple in the world that I thought would make it forever, it would have been you two. I squeezed her hand back. If there was ever a time I wished I were 20 years younger, it was right now. I'm showing my age, Gail, but there was an old show called Gunsmoke on television. It was a great show. They had one episode where the hero, a marshal called Matt Dillon, met a gunslinger who was faster on the draw than he was. That never happened. Everybody was stunned, but Dillon wasn't surprised. Never a horse that couldn't be rode. Never a rider that couldn't be throwed. That's a short way of saying, never say never. Nobody is guaranteed anything in this life, except dying. She just shook her head and stood up. Are you going to be back to work Monday? I'll give you more time if you need it. I'll be in the office. I think I'm all boozed out. Business doesn't stop and I need to work. She was at the door and stopped. She just stood there for a moment and then turned back to me. You haven't said anything, Hugh, but I know you have to be thinking about me and Robert and Cameron. No, that was you. This is me. You don't have to be in uncle mode, Hugh. I know you're thinking it. Robert loved me and I cheated on him for months. I screwed Cameron in boardrooms and in motel rooms and in limousines. Then I dumped Robert after Cameron and his friends nearly killed him. After I dumped a good man, the man I loved turned out to be a world-class SHD. Things happen, Gail. I stopped judging people a long time ago. And if you look at me as an uncle, I have to admit I've looked at you as a kind of niece. I thought you were making a mistake. I thought you were hurting a good man, and I knew Cameron was a piece of SHD who would hurt you. Everybody knew it, except you. But it was your life. She ran her hand through her mane of blonde hair. The sunlight gleamed on it like a soft helmet. She was a beautiful woman. I loved Mary, and there was no woman in the world I would have chosen over her for my bed. But I knew objectively that Mary was just an attractive woman, and Gail was a stunner. But she slept alone except for the regular turnstile of tall, dark, and handsome studs that she ran through her bedroom since she'd thrown Cameron out. Meanwhile, Robert Sandler, who had loved her, had vanished off the face of the earth as far as the Hunt banks were concerned. No one could mention his name in her presence. I thought sometimes that she fought too hard to ignore him, but, like I'd said, it was her life. The reason I mention it, and I know I've made it law that nobody ever talks about that anywhere I can hear of it, is this. I know I'm royally pissed at Mary right now for what she's doing. It hurts me to see you hurting like this, and you are, no matter how much you carry on the stiff upper lip act, hurting. However, despite my current view of Mary's actions, I know what it's like to fall in love, to be obsessed, overcome with passion for someone when you know it's wrong and you know you're hurting people you shouldn't hurt, yet you do it anyway. It's like falling off a cliff. Suddenly you're there, and you don't know how you got there, but nothing else matters except that one person. I've talked to other people who've gone through it, and I know it happens to men, but I think it hits women harder because we're supposed to be the good S. We expect men to be dogs. The point is, have you thought about, what if she comes back? What if she decides she was wrong and tells you she just went crazy for a while? When I didn't answer her, she asked, well, there isn't anything to come back to, and she won't. How can you be so sure? You didn't see her face when she was talking about him. She isn't coming back. Work turned out to be a tonic. I went to work that Monday and walked into my office. If anybody knew what was going on, I couldn't tell. It was just another day. Except that in that day and the days that followed, nobody asked me how Mary was doing. None of the secretaries that had exchanged recipes pulled off the internet mentioned trying to reach her and being unable to. There was a dinner and dance the very next weekend at the Lodge and Club in Ponte Vedra, a high-dollar beachfront hotel south of Jacksonville where the Hunts had been wining and dining investors, rich clients, and important politicians for a generation. This was a combination business bash and $1,000 a plate goodbye dinner for former Jacksonville State Attorney Dallas Edwards. He had been a personal friend of Old Man Hunt going back more than 20 years, and Gail had been a good friend of the woman who had been the wife of Edwards' former #1 assistant, who had played such a part in the massacre at the courthouse. All the major officers were expected to show the colors and be there, so I attended. There was a time when Mary would have been at my side, but Coffee Allaport, a 30-ish mathematical whiz who had revolutionized the computer side of the banking business and looked better in a formal gown than most women did in nothing at all, sat beside me at one of the 4 head tables. I felt like a cradle robber. She looked younger than her 35 or so years, and there was so much damned gleaming, mocha-colored skin showing that I felt like I should show and just to be polite. But she made little jokes about the banking business and about how secretaries had been subtly hitting on me since the early 20th century and got me to smile. Not to laugh, but even smiling was saying something. She talked me into going out on the dance floor, and she molded herself snugly against me, and I could feel the soft spheres cushioning themselves against my chest. She looked up at me in the middle of a slow dance, and there was a hint of a smile, a sad one, on her face as she said, "You're going to give me a complex hue? I'm practically giving you a massage and nothing. Am I losing it?" I bent forward and gave her a slight kiss on the forehead like you do to a favorite grandchild as I said, "If you weren't young enough to be my daughter, and if things were different, I'd be embarrassing us both, coffee, but I wanted to thank you for volunteering to spend time with me. It was a charitable gesture on your part." She leaned forward and cradled her face against my shoulder and said so softly other dancers couldn't hear us, "I know I should keep my mouth shut, but if that damned bee was here right now, I think I'd scratch her eyes out." The following Monday, about 11 a.m., as I was reading the Drudge Report on my desktop while pretending to be working, my secretary Lucy buzzed me to tell me I had a visitor. When she told me who he was and why he was there, I just leaned back in my chair and tried to catch my breath. It was like being hit a good, swift punch just under the ribs, so hard that your breath caught in your throat. Then I told her to send him in. Matt Henry was about 6'1", with a mane of silver hair, dressed sharply, and you could have known he was an attorney from a mile away. He handed me a large manila envelope. I didn't bother to open the tab. He extended his hand, and I automatically took it. "Mr. Davidson, my name is Matt Henry. I'm with the firm of Martin, Devon, Bailey, and Bartley. Thank you for seeing me." I just looked him with open curiosity. "Mr. Henry, I have to admit I'm puzzled. Why are you wasting your valuable, billable minutes doing what any courier could? You don't need an attorney to deliver divorce papers." He gestured to the seat in front of him and said, "Could I sit and I'll explain why I'm here?" "Sure." He sat and pointed at the manila envelope. "I didn't tell your secretary why I was here or what was in that envelope. Why would you assume those were divorce papers? You said you were here representing my wife, Mary. Not much suspense there. The only question is what exactly she wants." He sat and just looked at me for a moment, and I could tell his curiosity had been piqued by something. I waited. "Quite honestly, I'm here because you're Ms. Davidson. Only now she's going by Meadows, her maiden name, right? Asked our firm to personally deliver these documents and a message. She's already gone back to her maiden name?" I was surprised she moved so quickly to kick me to the curb, but dropping her married name? After 36 years. "That's what I was curious about, Mr. Davidson, to be honest." He gave me that same odd look. "What?" I was trying to figure out what the hell a husband could do to arouse those kind of feelings in a wife. "I'm not sure I follow yet." "It's fairly simple but pretty stark. Ms. Meadows wanted us to inform you that she has already moved her residence from Jacksonville to Chicago, and her company is transferring her to an open position there. She wanted us to let you know that she's taken any and all possessions she has any interest in from her former home. She has no interest in the home itself and will allow you to buy her out for 30% of the assessed value, or you can sell it and send her share of the proceeds onto her. That neat and surgical? That doesn't sound like my Mary, and she wants nothing else from the house. She took everything she wanted in a few days? You have no idea how neat and surgical she has been. She said to tell you that you are welcome to keep all your photos. She took only a handful of photos of your children. Any and all personal items of hers, including clothing, that you find still in the house you're urged to sell or give to Goodwill. She noted that you are probably aware, or should be, that she has removed about 40% of your combined savings and that she is in the process of separating all IRAs or combined financial assets. Again, if you have any questions, you are urged to contact or have your counsel contact our firm. There should be no reason for you to need to contact her, but if you should try, she will refuse to speak or communicate with you." She said that? She told me that personally in a conference call Friday. She said to tell you personally, myself, that she does not wish to ever see or talk to you, or be in the same city, if that is possible. She said further that she has requested the simplest type of divorce possible, simply separating your financial affairs and allowing both of you to walk away and make new lives for yourselves. Again, that is to avoid the necessity of ever having to engage in further contact with you. I just stared at him. Even after what had happened already, I was stunned. He lowered his voice and ran his tongue over his lips as if they were dry. You're welcome to have your attorney check out the documents, but they're simple and clear-cut. Ms. Meadows is literally cheating herself out of the settlement she could have after such a lengthy marriage and considering your income and assets. I tried to convince her to do the legally responsible thing, but she said the only thing she wants is her freedom at the earliest possible time. He shook his head a little. So I have to ask, what the hell did you do to piss off your wife so badly? Nothing. She just fell in love with somebody else. It does happen, even to people who've been married for 36 years. He stared at me again, undoubtedly wondering what I was lying about and concealing. The lawyers I've known have had the milk of human kindness curdled by constant exposure to the worst impulses of human nature and the formalized tortures of the legal system. If, like him, I'd walked into a situation where a couple, happily married 2 weeks before, had suddenly been cast into the lowest realm of hell in Dante's Inferno, I too would have figured there was more than the obvious going on. I knew what he had to be thinking. I was the bastard who had been screwing around on my long-suffering wife, and I'd finally gone one step too far. I gestured at the manila envelope. I'll have an attorney look at it and get back to you. Henry looked down for a moment and then back at me with a look of almost embarrassment on his handsome face. I hesitate to ask because this is somewhat unusual, Mr. Davidson, but is there any chance you could do this on an expedited basis? That is, see your attorney today and possibly get back with the signed papers by Wednesday at the latest? I tapped my fingers on the gleaming, washed oak surface of my desk and thought idly that I needed to get a manicure. I'd had a problem with biting my fingernails, actually my fingers, until they bled when I was younger. I never could quite figure out where I picked that up, but manicures were cheaper than visits to a psychiatrist, so I'd made that, along with $25 haircuts religiously the first of every month. Routine for the last 20 years. The last few months had played hell with my routine. Just so I understand you correctly, Mr. Henry, my wife, who leaves me and our home of nearly 40 years and our married name, wants me to drop everything so I can expedite the paperwork to make her a free woman in seemingly over-hasty fashion? Am I following you? I guess she forgot that I am a professional too, that I have a job and responsibilities. Henry held my stare for a moment, then dropped his eyes again and reached into his jacket pocket. He opened a piece of typewriter paper and looked up at me. I'm sorry, Mr. Davidson, but your Ms. Meadows read the following statement to me and asked me to read it to you if you had any problems complying with her request for haste. When I said nothing, he ran his fingers around the edges of the paper in some practiced gesture and then said softly, Hugh, I know this has been hard on you, and I am not giving you much time to come to terms with what's happened. However, as you said, if you ever loved me, if any part of that love still exists within you, give me my freedom. Let me go. I had thought I was past it. I had thought that she had done all the damage to me that she ever could. I was so wrong. I sat there and wanted a drink so bad I trembled. Henry stood up, carefully folding the paper up and putting it back in his jacket. He wasn't looking at me. He walked to the door and then looked back at me. I met his eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Davidson. There's nothing easy about divorce, and I know this is hard. I can look at you and tell how hard this is going to be. I've handled a lot of divorces over the years, and the only ones where it ever made sense to delay and dig your heels in were the ones where there was hope of a reconciliation, where both sides still wanted the marriage to work. In this case, have your attorneys check it carefully, but your wife isn't out to screw you. It's the fairest proposal I've ever seen except for maybe one I handled last year. And that was a divorce that shouldn't have happened. I still have bad feelings about that one, but in this case it's like pulling off a band-aid. This is personal, one man to another. Don't draw it out. Get it over with for both your sakes. Then he was gone, and I was left with the manila envelope. Nobody came in for the hour. I sat staring at it. Finally, I lifted the telephone on my desk and made the call that I knew I had to make.